SsangYong Actyon of the second generation, 2011-2021 years of release. Good day, if you are wondering is it worth buying a second generation SsangYong Actyon and what problems you may encounter during operation, then you're at the right place. So the weak paintwork is the problem of almost all modern models. The Korean crossover is no exception. Chips and scratches on the body surface form very quickly. This could be tolerated if not for corrosion, which begins to develop under the thinnest film of paintwork and at first simply goes unnoticed. The picture is especially unsightly in the upper part of the body, where apparently a thinner layer of soil was used in the manufacture of the car. As a result, it's not the wheel arches and seals that are primarily susceptible to corrosion in the SsangYong Actyon, but the door frames, the body pillar and the leading edge of the roof. On the other hand, there are quite a few Actyon owners who have not encountered similar problems. This can only be explained by the variation in quality when painting the car body. Another feature of the Actyon body is its low torsional rigidity. It's better to avoid diagonal loads when driving on light off-road conditions. Otherwise, the body will begin to breathe, which will contribute to imperceptible to the naked eye damage to the paintwork and wells. Especially goes to the paintwork in the roof opening of the trunk. If there are obvious paint defects on the selected SsangYong Actyon in this place, there is no doubt that the crossover was not operated in sparing conditions. On the oldest Actyons, rust can be found both on the trunk lid and on the doors. Fortunately, at the moment, the centers of corrosion are small. Another thing is that in no case should they be launched. On those specimens that are operated in cities where roads are actively sprinkled with reagents, suspension elements covered with surface corrosion and rusty fasteners are ubiquitous. Buying a SsangYong Actyon damaged in an accident is dubious undertaking. There are not very many inexpensive Chinese spare parts for this model. Original body parts cost a little more, but there is no need to talk about their high quality either. In addition, given the relatively low cost of the Korean crossover, replacing damaged body parts entirely may be economically impractical. The situation is aggravated by the fact that all sorts of trifles, which in theory should cost a penny, in the case of Actyon can be unexpectedly expensive. In addition, you will have to take into account that there are practically no spare parts for the Actyon at the disassembly. As a result, a lot of parts will have to be bought on order, which can scratch the restoration of a car damaged in an accident for an indefinite period. Quickly overwritten front optics and windshield can be replaced if desired. At the same time, you can try to improve the headlights, since the native Actyon headlights are frankly lacking in efficiency. Fortunately, you can even handle the replacement of lamps alone. There is nothing to praise for the native wiper blades, which very quickly begin to leave stains on the glass. There are no complaints about the bumpers. They are made of strong plastic, thanks to which they practically do not suffer during contact city parking. The same cannot be said for the rear view camera and fog lamps mounts. With the onset of frost, they become very fragile and often break. When examining your favorite instance, you should definitely pay attention to the central brake light. On those SsangYong Actyon that were released before the 2013 update, it doesn't last long. Unfortunately, replacing individual LEDs will not work. The brake light will have to be replaced in the assembly, which makes replacement relatively expensive. To the level of 200,000 kilometers in the Korean crossover, door hinges sag. Most of the used Actyons so far have driven much less. But in the future, the problem of sagging hinges will definitely become more urgent. As the mileage increases, Actyon owners will increasingly have to deal with broken door locks. In the design of the locks, there are many gears that cannot boast of high endurance. In addition, gearboxes and door lock motors can be replaced. Door stops are also not reliable. They lose their effectiveness as early as 40-50,000 kilometers. Few owners of Actyon are ready to change them for the new ones. Salon SsangYong Actyon is frankly plastic. The plastic on the center console and doors is frankly inexpensive. However, given the class and cost of the Korean crossover, you can put up with it. It's much more difficult to come to terms with the fact that already by the mark of 60-70,000 kilometers, the interior panels finally loosen and begin to creak when passing irregularities. A little later, before the mileage of 100-120,000 kilometers, the driver's seat is rented, the pillow of which finally sags under heavy drivers. If a small man or woman is behind the wheel, the situation will not be so depressing by the same mileage, especially when it comes to fabric seats. All things being equal, inexpensive leatherette upholstery will look worse. How good the Actyon interior will look depends on the owner's accuracy. Silent plastic and door handles, if handled carelessly, quickly become covered with scratches. Another weak point is the hinges of the glow box, sun visors and armrest. Often one awkward movement is enough for them to be broken. The steering column levers were also very flimsy. Moreover, with age they begin to fix worse. The steering column also has problems with fixing. Fortunately, it plays in a very small range, due to which this drawback remains unnoticed by many owners for a long time. In the Actyon air conditioner, the weak point is the air conditioning compressor. In hot regions, when the air conditioner has to work constantly, it can withstand from 80 to 100,000 kilometers. Worse, if due to a jammed compressor, the accessory drive belt breaks. As for motorists from the northern regions, they should remember that the diesel power unit was also offered for Actyon. Due to its design features, it heats up extremely slowly and only under load. As a result, the heat during a short city trip in a crossover with a diesel engine under the hood can never be expected. The electrics of SsangYong Actyon are simple, but despite this, there are a lot of problems with it, affected by the insufficiently high quality of components. For example, a generator often cannot withstand 60,000 kilometers. The drive belt doesn't always withstand the same mark. The problem is compounded by the ill-conceived tensioner design, which is why many owners try to postpone the replacement of the drive belt until the last. Especially in this regard, you will not envy the owners of the Actyon with a diesel engine, where sometimes it's not possible to squeeze the tensioner into the service position at all. Another typical diesel problem is the failure of the EGT sensor, after which a garland of warning lights flashes on the dashboard. Periodic failures or breakdowns can be expected from other sensors, the handbrake and the ESP stabilization system. With age, the four-wheel drive control unit, as well as the electric power steering sensor, begins to fail. After a run of 100-120,000 kilometers, the problems with the electrics become even greater. First of all, the owners have to deal with the lost contacts in the ignition lock, as well as the burning wires going to the battery. The next typical problems are the failure of the heated front seats and the failure of the drive of the rear view mirrors and side windows. When inspecting a car you like, you should also check the performance of the wiper and at the same time make sure that the wiring is intact. The latter unfortunately becomes more and more fragile over the years. Automotive electricians and mechanics with low qualifications who are not familiar with SsangYong cars also contribute to the emergence of electrical problems, whose intervention often doesn't solve but exacerbates the problem. However, in fairness, it should be said that most of Actyon's electrical problems are inexpensively solved, and if you carefully check the car before buying and pay attention to the weak points, then their number can be reduced to a minimum without much difficulty. The Korean company developed the G20D gasoline engine installed on the Actyon independently, but the diesel engines D20F and D22F are formally borrowed from the Germans from Mercedes-Benz. Another thing is that by the time the second generation Actyon appeared, their initial design had been changed so much that it was no longer necessary to talk about a banal borrowing. Officially, crossovers with a 2.2-liter diesel engine were not sold on the Russian market. The Koreans decided that a 175 horsepower version with a 2.0-liter diesel engine would be sufficient. In addition, a 149 horsepower version of a 2-liter diesel engine was sold on the Russian market. A similar power was developed by the gasoline engine of the same volume. It is important to understand that despite the high power, it's not always convenient to drive the 175 horsepower diesel Actyon. The highly accelerated unit has a very narrow operating range, which requires very frequent gear changes. As a result, in terms of dynamics, the crossover with the most powerful diesel engine wins almost nothing over the 149 horsepower petrol version. All other things being equal, a gasoline power unit is also preferable from the point of view of reliability. Its design is simple, so repair problems usually do not arise. The problem of scuffing is not typical for a 2-liter gasoline engine. Phase regulators were also successful in the G20D. All the minor problems are oil seals and gasket prone to leakage at high loads. Perhaps the only weak point of the 2-liter gasoline engine was the gas distribution mechanism tensioner and the timing chain of an unsuccessful design. And although breakdowns in the timing drive are relatively rare, they often end up with a major overhaul of the power unit. Following Volkswagen's lead, SsangYong engineers used a hydraulic chain tensioner. As a result, like on Volkswagen EA111 and EA888 motors, the chain can jump when starting a cold engine. If you're lucky and the chain only jumps one tooth, the loss will be minimal. The engine simply won't start, keeping the valves intact. Another thing is that many owners, after the first unsuccessful attempt, try to start the engine again and again, literally creating new problems for themselves and with their own hands. Not only the engine that suddenly refuses to start, but also the chain that rattled when starting should alert no less. In no case should extraneous sounds be allowed during the operation of the heated power unit. There are many known cases when the gagging timing chain broke off 50-60,000 kilometers after the next replacement. Interestingly, Russian motorists have long found an alternative to their not too reliable home timing chain. If you carefully study the specialized forums, it turns out that many owners use chains from the ZMZ409 motor. Another thing is that you have to pay for the increased chain resource with increased wear of the stars. In no case should you ignore the first signs of wear on the stars, since delay can lead to a loss of teeth and subsequent expensive repairs. A replacement was also found for the native tensioner. In particular, tensioners from Mercedes-Benz diesel engines are suitable for the Korean crossover, with which the risk of chain jumping is really reduced. Against the background of the timing chain, the oil pump chain looks much more reliable. It can easily withstand 150-200,000 kilometers. After this run it should be replaced, but the problem is that the worn out oil pump chain doesn't give out extraneous sounds. As a result, many owners of used SsangYong Actyon simply forget about it, because of which, after a run of 200,000 kilometers, it can also break when starting a cold engine. This happens especially often when the engine is filled with too thick oil. Actyon diesel engines have fundamentally different problems. In our conditions, their weak point can be considered the Delphi fuel equipment, which turned out to be extremely sensitive to dirty diesel fuel. There are especially many claims in this regard to those power units that were installed on the Actyon before the update. After restyling, the fuel equipment became less sensitive to low-quality diesel fuel, due to which the number of complaints about it decreased significantly. Another common problem is injector prone to sticking to the cylinder head. It's not for nothing that experienced craftsmen specializing in SsangYong cars advise as a preventive measure to clean the valves with the removal of the nozzles at least once every 2 years. The Actyon diesel engine generally loves to be taken care of. If you ignore the pouring nozzles and failures in the EGR system, then in the future you will have to face the appearance of cracks in the cylinder head and burnout of the pistons. A little less often, a disregard for the motor leads to the formation of scuffing of the crankshafts. Possible problems with the earbuds should not be disregarded. At risk are those cars with a manual transmission, the owners of which, in order to save fuel, at any opportunity include an overdrive forcing the engine to run at minimum speed. When purchasing a diesel Actyon, you should pay close attention to the turbine. On a Korean crossover, you can start eating up oil to the 100-120,000 kilometers mark. At the same time, there are lucky ones who do not know problems with the turbine before much more serious runs. However, the demand for non-original and second-hand turbines among second-generation SsangYong Actyon owners is consistently high. On the good news, the timing chain is indicatively reliable in comparison with the gasoline engine. Rather, problems should be expected from the hydraulic chain tensioner. The fact that it needs to be replaced will be prompted by walking phases and loud noise when starting the engine. Front-wheel drive versions of the Actyon are rare in the aftermarket. Most buyers at one time deliberately chose modifications with all-wheel drive, since it was in terms of cross-country ability that Actyon definitely left most of its classmates behind. The Actyon has no major transmission problems, but there could be fewer minor problems. First of all, trouble should be expected from the CV joints, the resource of which turned out to be very small. Often they have to be changed with runs up to 100,000 kilometers. If the car often drives off-road, then the already undistinguished resource becomes even less. In addition, the splines on the drive shafts suffer from off-road driving. On the Actyon with all-wheel drive, the bevel gearbox will require attention. In it, every now and then you will have to control the oil level. If the latter is insufficient, then first the owners will have to deal with whining bearings, and after a run of 150-180,000 kilometers, they will have to work out to replace worn shafts. It's worth checking the oil level not only in the bevel gear, but also in the reverse gear. Fortunately, even in the most sad case, it will not be difficult to repair the latter. As for the rear axle coupling, with an increase in mileage, it begins to leak and vibrate. This is especially true for copies of the first years of release. On the other hand, the couplings that were installed in the early years give the Actyon better flotation. The later design has become more reliable and is practically not prone to leakage, but it doesn't transfer traction to the rear axle as efficiently as before. The manual gearbox is also not immune to oil leaks. Surprisingly, the first small smudges may appear even before the 100,000 km mark. Furthermore, as for the mileage increases, the gearbox drive begins to loosen up more and more, and by the mileage of 180-200,000 km, the mechanic begins to work with noticeable noises. The weak point of the mechanical box is the dual-mass flywheel. There are cases when it fell apart with a run of 70-80,000 km. Typically, when Actyon owners become seriously concerned about shock and vibration while on the move, the flywheel will wear to the point where it cannot be repaired. It will not work to purchase a non-original flywheel. We'll have to fork out for a new part, which will cost 40-50,000 rubles. Surprisingly, the flywheel lasts less on an Actyon with a gasoline engine than on a crossover with a diesel engine. On the diesel version, the flywheel in most cases can easily withstand 150-170,000 km. The automatic transmission, indexed BTR-DSI 6M11, turned out to be even less reliable. In the first years of the release of the second generation Actyon, the automaton had a huge number of childhood diseases. At the same time, the situation was aggravated by the unstable quality of a number of box components. DSI specialists took the Honda automatic design as a basis for a new box, but reworked it taking into account the use of new solenoids. As a result, the latter turned out to be overloaded. There is nothing difficult in replacing solenoids for specialists, but replacement must be done on time. Naturally, many owners of both used and new Actyons didn't knew about this. As a result, the first failed solenoid provokes the development of several problems at once. In particular, the brake band, its servo drive, and the piston rod of the servo drive suffer from untimely replaced solenoids. Further, the rod begins to break its seat in the body, after which the repair becomes even more expensive. Another weak point of the automatic transmission is the bearing of the rear planetary gear set. Over time it breaks, after which the sleeve is welded to the body. Worst of all, particles from a collapsed bearing begin to travel through the system and lead to damage to the valve body, differential and oil pump. In addition, the service life of the oil pump is reduced due to oil leaks and untimely oil replacement. If you don't change the working fluid in the box every 60,000 km by the mark of 150-170,000 km, the state of the oil pump will be close to deplorable. Often it's the oil pump which is unable to generate the pressure necessary for normal operation that is the cause of the jolts that occur when shifting gears. In addition to the oil pump, Teflon seal rings suffer from dirty oil. The rings themselves are inexpensive, but the box will have to be disassembled to replace them. As a result, the cost of replacement will be high in any case. If the first two versions of the automatic box installed on the Actyon before 2013 have long been recognized as frankly unsuccessful, then there are fewer complaints about the modified box, which the Koreans began to use after 2013. After working on the errors, the problems with the stem and planetary gear almost disappeared. If you drive the crossover carefully and abandon the aggressive driving style, then you may not encounter them at all. The transmission oil on the modified box is not so heavily contaminated, but the recommended interval for its replacement remains the same, every 50-60,000 km. With regular maintenance, the modified automatic can serve without problems at least 200-250,000 km per hour. But this is more true for the version with a gasoline engine. With the diesel engine with its higher torque, the automatic transmission a priori serves less. For example, until 2014, the automatic on diesel Actyon began to cause problems with runs of 60-70,000 km. In many ways, it was these early problems that seriously tarnished the Korean crossover's reputation. It's possible and necessary to try to increase the resource of an automatic transmission. The first step is to install a more efficient cooling system. Secondly, the design should be supplemented with an external oil filter. Interestingly, in the case of Actyon with an automatic, some experts recommend carrying out the so-called preventive maintenance as a preventive measure. Prevention carried out with a run of 100,000 km includes replacing Teflon rings, an internal internal filter seals and rubberized pistons. In addition, the brake band and its servo piston fall under the replacement. Of course, such a large list of works will require serious costs, but practice shows that in the near future they will help to seriously save money. The second scenario is also possible. At the first unpleasant symptoms with the box, the car is quickly sold, after which the next owner of the used Actyon has to invest in repairs. Suspension SsangYong Actyon is well tuned, but it cannot boast of an outstanding service life of consumables. The original stabilizer struts can withstand only 20–30,000 kilometers. Naturally, on used crossovers, they have long been replaced by a better quality non-original. Moreover, the racks from some Mazda and Toyota models are suitable for Actyon. Subject to frequent trips on bad roads to the mark of 80,000 km, wheel bearings and constant velocity joints develop their resource. However, under ideal conditions they will last from 120 to 150,000 km. However, the average reliability of suspension parts should hardly be upsetting, since consumables are inexpensive. Rather, Actyon owners are unhappy with the fact that even a fully serviceable crossover suspension cannot boast of silence. During operation, the suspension emits a lot of extraneous sounds, the source of which is often not very easy to find. In the gasoline version of the Actyon, a hydraulic power steering was more often used, and diesel ones after restyling an electric one. All things being equal, it's better to choose an instance with power steering, since the electric amplifier turned out to be unsuccessful. It can knock and squeak during operation, and its sensors are often buggy and transmit incorrect information to the ESP stabilization system. This in turn leads to incorrect operation of the all-wheel drive system. The electric amplifier is not insured against common breakdowns, failure of sensors and the motor, as well as burnout of the wiring. Against this background, the hydraulic booster seems to be a paragon of reliability. Provided that the working fluid is replaced in a timely manner, it will last at least 200,000 km. With high mileage, a barely noticeable backlash appears in the power steering, but this is not a serious problem. SsangYong's braking system is simple. Some owners note a small resource of original discs and pads, but for buyers of used crossovers, where these elements of the brake system have already been replaced, this problem is no longer relevant. The weak point in the brake system is the handbrake cables. They are inexpensive, but not all owners are ready to visit mechanics to replace them every 3 years. The situation is similar with the maintenance of the calipers. On those Actyons, which often move in the mud, they quickly turn sour. Nice appearance, attractive technical characteristics, and even more attractive price tag. For those who are not ready to dig deeper and understand the ins and outs of the Korean crossover, SsangYong's Actyon of the second generation can deliver many unpleasant surprises, especially when it comes to copies released before 2014. A few years after the start of production, Actyon got better, but by this time the demand for it had dropped. As a result, in the secondary market, for the most part, raw cars of 2011-2013 years of production are sold. They're inexpensive, but if you buy Actyon for at least 3–4 years, you will definitely not be able to do without investing in it. As a result, in financial terms, it will hardly be possible to win in comparison with classmates. If you are the owner, then be sure to leave a comment about this car. Your review will definitely help others with the choice of a car.